Reclaiming the femininity of God. It sounds very pretentious, doesn't it? So I wanted to introduce you to this picture first. This picture is of a sculpture called Descending of the Spirit. And it encompasses both the male and female of God. It's in the Abbey cloisters at Iona, and it was made by a Lithuanian Jew. Our concept of God as gendered is not as old as we might think. So let's explore that. Shakespeare famously wrote that a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. And yet we continue to try to put fixed names and fixed ideas on the most outlandish and the most complex structure that we have, the divine or God. Most world religions, particularly those with more than one God, have both male and female gods, and God who is neither. But somehow, most Christian denominations, up until very, very recently, have adopted the concept that God is male. And more than that, that God is that white bearded old man, mostly that God is white. And where did we get that from? When did God become male and when did God become white? Well, God became white when the Europeans decided that they wanted to take over the world and justify it that way. One of our churches had until about a year ago, had a big statue in it of Jesus, who was very, very white. Now, most of us know that Jesus was in fact a Palestinian Jew who was most likely brown in skin tone. Over the course of about 10 years, Jesus has been ever so slightly touched up to get darker and darker in this church. But a year ago, Jesus was removed. Not because they were removing Jesus from the church, but because having a white Jesus did not make sense in a world which is not a white world. So does having God as male make any more sense in a world which is not exclusively male? No, and it never did. From the very beginning of the Bible, right back at the beginning, God was both male and female. In the reading tonight we heard that Genesis created humanity in their own image. The image of God they were created, male and female. In Deuteronomy, God gave birth. And now we haven't quite reached the point in medical science where men can give birth, so, or at least not those who are biologically male at birth. So, therefore, we assume that God had some feminine traits. In Isaiah, God is recognized as mother. In Proverbs, the wisdom of God is feminized and known as Sophia. In Exodus, we hear God describing themselves to Moses as I am who I am. There is no gender in that statement. We call God Yahweh, but Yah is female and Way is masculine. So even in the name of God, we recognize that God is both male and female. Matthew talks about Jesus saying that he cares about the people as a mother hen cares about her chicks. That wisdom, again, is female. In Galatians, Paul even Paul, who is not renowned for his love of the female half of the species, speaks of his childbirth pain that we have all been given. The recognition throughout the Bible, from start to finish, that God and our experience of God is both masculine and feminine, is there. In the early church, Bishop of Alexandria talked about God as father and mother. Augustine talked about God as mother. Gregory talked about God as mother. If God was such a mother in 350 AD, how did God become purely king and father in the Bible that we were raised with? Well, the truth is, throughout history, we're pretty good at adjusting the standard understanding of God in order to support whoever's in power or whoever holds that power. As a child, I was raised with lots of pictures of white Jesus, probably because that was convenient, because it encouraged us to believe that Jesus was just like us. Jesus and God as king supported a power structure that countries and worlds were revolved around. Women's spirituality was a threat to that. For centuries, it was okay for Celtic traditions to have female priestesses and male priests. But suddenly those female priestesses were branded witches because they threatened the status quo. They threatened the powerful male leaders of the church. When doctors became male only, the gifts of women to heal were oppressed. When church leaders felt threatened by strong women, they were branded witches. And they still are. Fortunately, for me in particular, since I'm standing here preaching, and as Andrew pointed out last week, according to Paul, that would be a bad thing because women shouldn't teach, and women especially should not teach men. We're moving on. Even our traditional denominations that have relied for decades and centuries on a male-dominated episcopate of bishops have started to allow women to lead the denominations. And as women lead the denominations, the question comes, sometime later because we're a bit slow on this, does God have to be king? Does God have to be he? Does God have to be father? Now MCC is world leading in this because we gender inclusify God. But we didn't start out that way. Before we think that we had it all right from the beginning, in one of our earliest general conferences, every single line of our bylaws was amended because one woman stood up and objected to every single line and asked that every time it said he, it should say he or she. It is because people stand up and challenge that status quo that things change. It is because women said, I am called to follow. I am called in God's image to be who I am. God is not male, so why does this have to be this way? So we are reclaiming that God is both male and female, and neither. God is I am. And that even if we have an understanding of a male God, that God can have feminine traits. And a female God could have masculine traits. When we define those traits in ourselves as male and female, we limit ourselves. When we say that men are strong, or men are better at this, and we say that women are more nurturing, or weaker, or gentler, we limit both men and women to an understanding of themselves. How much more do we limit God if we say that God is male? And we say that God is the ruler, God is the king, God is the soldier, the fighter. No, God is everything. And so are we. I wrote last week's newsletter piece a little bit because everywhere I turn, everybody wants to know, what am I having? Yes, we're having a baby. And the scan says it's a boy, so the birth certificate will probably say it's a boy. And at some point after that point, we might find out whether it is a boy or whether actually they would like to be something else. And at some point, we'll find out what kind of child. There's a meme going around that says, you're scared of a boy playing with dolls. Are you scared that'll make them a good father, a good uncle? When we put boxes on people, we do them a disservice. When we put boxes on God, we lose the capacity to understand how great God can be. The reason why The Shack made such a good movie and such a good book is because it introduces us again to God as a person that we can connect with, and challenges our concept of who God is. The original book makes it very clear that God can be a woman and a father. Just as the Bible says, God is masculine and a mother. When they made the movie and they made God a black woman, that was kind of shocking for some people. But it shouldn't be shocking, because we should be able to embrace that God is everything. I come back to the definition that God described themselves as to Moses. I am who I am. And I challenge you all to look at God's image in your head and allow God to be what you need God to be in that moment. And to recognize that if we are each made in God's own image, can we embrace that that includes the entire cross-section of gender? Male, female, both, and neither. Amen.